Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Well, buckle up, because today we're wading into the, let's say, murky waters of U.S.-China relations.
Definitely complex and pretty high stakes right now, especially for, for businesses trying to navigate it all.
Absolutely. And a perfect lens to view all this through is the recent China International Supply Chain Expo. It just wrapped up, and it brought together, well, a lot of big names in global business.
Yeah, some heavy hitters for sure.
Oh, yeah. We're talking Tim Cook from Apple, Tesla, Qualcomm, even Rio Tinto. I mean, that kind of lineup really signals just how much attention this whole U.S.-China dynamic is getting.
For sure. And it's timely, too. With potential shifts in trade policy on the horizon, well, everyone wants to know what the future holds.
Exactly. And speaking of Tim Cook, his presence was particularly interesting to me. This was his, third trip to China this year?
Yeah, something like that. He's been making the rounds.
And he was pretty upfront about Apple's reliance on their Chinese partners.
That seems, well, a little counterintuitive with all the talk about decoupling, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You've got this push for diversification, for, moving away from China, and then you have Apple. I mean, they're so deeply embedded in the Chinese manufacturing and consumer ecosystem.
Right. I mean, they manufacture the majority of their products there, right?
Exactly, through partners like Foxconn, of course. But it's not just manufacturing. China's a huge consumer market for Apple, too. So you can see why Cook might be emphasizing collaboration and kind of downplaying this whole decoupling idea, at least for now.
So maybe decoupling isn't really feasible for a company like Apple, or at least not desirable, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. The cost and logistical challenges of completely uprooting their supply chain would be enormous and potentially alienate a key market. Not to mention the political implications. Yeah, those are some serious risks. And Cook wasn't alone at that expo. It was packed with U.S. companies actually outnumbering businesses from any other nation. So clearly, despite the tensions, there's still heavy investment in China. Why do you think that engagement is so crucial for them, even with the risks so apparent?
Well, I think there are a few key motivations. First, China is still a manufacturing powerhouse. The infrastructure, the skilled labor, and the scale of operations there, it's hard to replicate anywhere else.
Right. And then there's the massive Chinese consumer market. I mean, for a lot of companies, access to that market is just, it's too valuable to just walk away from.
Absolutely. And, there's also the potential for influencing policy. By being present and engaged, U.S. companies hope they can kind of shape the evolving trade landscape to their advantage.
Right. It makes them a part of the conversation. And speaking of that evolving landscape, the Chinese premier came out pretty strongly against this whole decoupling idea.
He did. He basically warned of dire consequences for global commerce if we go down that path.
Yeah. And for someone who might not be totally familiar with this concept, could you break down what decoupling really means and why it's even on the table?
Sure. So decoupling basically refers to the unwinding of those intricate economic ties between the U.S. and China. So you're talking about shifting supply chains, reducing reliance on Chinese manufacturing, and potentially limiting trade between the two. It's being considered because of concerns about overdependence on China.
Makes sense. Too many eggs in one basket and all that.
Exactly. And then there are geopolitical risks. Worries about intellectual property theft. And, some argue that relying so heavily on one country, especially one with differing political ideologies, just creates vulnerabilities. It's a push for more resilient, more diversified supply chains.
So like spreading the risk a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And we are seeing some of that already. Apple, for instance, has started shifting some production to India. So the idea is gaining traction.
So we've got these competing forces. Deep economic ties, a desire for decoupling, and all of this is happening against the backdrop of potential tariffs from, President-elect Trump. Didn't he float the idea of like a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports?
He did, and he even suggested possible spikes to, get this, 60 or even 100%.
Wow. Those are some serious numbers.
Yeah, it would definitely shake things up. And the economic impact of those tariffs could be significant. Companies operating in China would be hit with higher costs, which they'd likely pass on to consumers.
So basically, we'd all end up paying more for our electronics,
Right.
clothes, everything.
Potentially, yeah. Think about it. Your next iPhone could be 10% more expensive just because of tariffs. That's a real impact. And we could also see companies trying to shift production to other countries to avoid those tariffs.
But wouldn't that take time and potentially disrupt those supply chains we were talking about?
It absolutely could. And all of this, of course, feeds back into those warnings from the Chinese premier about harming global commerce.
It's like a domino effect. And then, you add in China's alliances with Iran and Russia, and suddenly the geopolitical considerations get even more complex. So, with all these moving pieces, what's the key takeaway? What should our listeners really be thinking about as they follow this story?
I think the key takeaway is that it's all connected. Global trade is this incredibly complex system with economic and political threads woven tightly together. And businesses, they have to navigate this intricate web, constantly balancing risks and opportunities.
And for the average person, why should they care about all this?
Because it affects all of us. Understanding these dynamics helps you make more informed choices as a consumer, as a citizen.
So U.S.-China relations are definitely in a state of flux. It's a situation with high stakes for businesses, the global economy, and frankly, for all of us. It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Definitely a lot to watch in the coming months.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive helpful in understanding the latest developments, please do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tell a friend. It really helps us reach a wider audience and bring these insightful deep dives to more people.
We appreciate your support.
Until next time.